Okay, our first special guest tonight is Terry Ryder from hotspotting.com.au. Terry's on the line to speak about the virtues of the Adelaide market, but then also it's a bit of state of flux, what is happening there and how does it compare to other markets. So thanks for joining us tonight, Terry.
Hi, Jacob. How are you doing?
Not too bad, thank you. Yeah, so we're speaking about Adelaide tonight. Terry, how does it compare for you to other markets, and where do you see it sitting in terms of the growth cycle?
Yeah, well, there's no doubt that Adelaide is a market in the ascendancy right now. Generally speaking, I'd say Adelaide is the most underrated market amongst the capital cities of Australia. Investors tend to overlook it. I guess South Australia and Adelaide have the perception of not being growth markets in the way that people perceive Queensland to be, for example. But I think it's a much better market long term and also in the immediate future than people actually realise. Until recently, in fact, Adelaide, in terms of the 10-year growth rates, had a better capital growth rate than Sydney did, but Sydney has overtaken it now after 3 years of strong price growth. But Adelaide, long term, has been a very solid performer on capital growth. And perhaps more importantly for investors now, it's entering a growth phase. It's definitely got rising momentum. There's been a steady increase in sales volumes over the last 12 to 18 months, and that inevitably is going to lead to pretty solid price growth down the track. Okay,
so when you say underrated, that is looking at the current state of the market, but then potentially the future potential?
Yeah, well, that's right. I think Adelaide has been underrated for some time. As I say, it's actually been a very, very solid long-term performer on capital growth, and a lot of people don't realise that, so they tend to discount its prospects and prefer to be investing in what they perceive to be growth cities like, say, Brisbane and Perth. But Adelaide has been a good performer long-term, but I think backing that up and reinforcing that is its immediate-term prospects for growth in, say, the next 12 to 18 months. We've seen over the last, say, 6 months, quarter by quarter, a rise in the number of sales happening in the Adelaide market. So the number of actually what we call growth suburbs with rising sales volumes, has increased steadily. We do research every 3 months for the Price Predictor Index.
Yep.
So Adelaide looked pretty solid when we did it in February. It looked even better when we did it in May, and now we're just currently doing the research again for the August edition of the Price Predictor Index, and it's improved still further. So at this point, Adelaide actually has more growth suburbs than Sydney does, which would surprise people. But what people don't realise is that sales volumes in Sydney have dropped over the last 6 months. The market hasn't really picked up on that point yet. So the Sydney market has already passed its peak and is actually starting to taper off, whereas Adelaide is rising. So we're at the point now where Adelaide actually, even though it's a much smaller city, has more suburbs with growth in the sales volumes than Sydney at the moment.
Wonderful. And so this is all referring back to the Price Predictor Index report, Terry, which you are putting together still, but you've done the research for Adelaide, which is due out at the end of the month. Is that correct?
That's right. We'll have that report finished and published on the website by the end of the month, but we're just working through it city by city now. And we've done Adelaide and regional South Australia, and the numbers are very encouraging for anyone interested in buying in Adelaide. And of course, the great attraction of Adelaide is that it's the most affordable mainland city. You can buy there considerably more cheaply than you can in all the other mainland cities, particularly Sydney and Melbourne.
Yes.
And you've got not only that level of affordability, but you've got price growth in the immediate term to look forward to, as well as a good, solid, long-term track record. So there's a lot to recommend Adelaide to investors who would tend otherwise perhaps to overlook it.
We've had a lot of interest here in the last week following last week's webcast around the poll results, etc., asking for Adelaide. Any sneak peeks into the report, or at a suburb level, any suburbs that are standing out?
Yeah, well, there's two main areas in Adelaide at the moment. Certainly the top end is not the one that's standing out. It's more the cheaper end plus what we call the middle market.
Sure.
So there are very affordable. Adelaide has some very, very cheap areas, areas that are perhaps stigmatised as being down market, but nevertheless.
Are you talking the Salisbury area, etc.?
The Salisbury area, yes, in the northern suburbs. That actually comes through as the number 2 municipality in our latest research. So it has more growth suburbs than any other municipality in the Adelaide metropolitan area, except for one that I'll talk about in a moment, but still continues to come up very strongly in this research. There are suburbs there we can buy houses quite easily around the $200,000 mark and getting 6% plus rental yield, so it's attractive from that perspective.
Yes.
But good momentum in that market. But the number one precinct is the Charles Sturt municipality, and that's more middle market Adelaide. Certainly not the top end, but those sort of middle ring suburbs, they show up very strongly in the research at the moment, and it's particularly in the western suburbs. The swanky, most expensive end of town of Adelaide is east of the CBD, inner city suburbs on the eastern side and some on the southern side. And people tend to overlook this middle market, which is the western suburbs, but it's very well located because they're between the CBD and the ocean, so they're very well located from that perspective.
Wonderful.
It surprises me that they tend to be a little bit overlooked. But in middle market in Adelaide means suburbs with medium prices in, say, the 400,000 and 500,000, whereas middle market in Melbourne would be more like 800,000 or 900,000. So again, you've got that very, very attractive affordability for a very good standard of housing. And these suburbs have lots of character homes at affordable prices, so well worth considering.
Beautiful. That's amazing insight there, Terry. Thank you so much. So just for further information on this, look out at the end of the month for the Price Predictor Index report. So that's a quarterly report that has been updated. $99 including GST, if I'm correct, Terry, and that's on the hotspotting.com.au site for further information.
Right. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Terry.
You're welcome, Jacob.